America has a secret, and it is not hidden in Washington. It is not buried in Silicon Valley. It is not locked inside some Swiss bank account. It is sitting inside the lobbies of office towers in Houston, behind the iron gates of gated communities in New Jersey, inside the boardrooms of companies that build hospitals and highways and hotels across the United States. The secret is this: there is a Pakistani family operating at the highest levels of American business and American real estate, and they are completely untouchable. Not because of some legal loophole, not because of political connections, though they have plenty of those. They are untouchable because they built something so deeply woven into the fabric of this country that removing them would require unraveling the country itself. They employ thousands of Americans. They pay hundreds of millions in taxes. They fund hospitals, universities, and mosques. They own land, buildings, businesses, and political relationships that span 6 decades and 2 continents. Their name is Hasnan, though they operate under a constellation of corporate identities that most people have never connected to a single family. And if you think the story of the richest Pakistani family in America is just a business story, you are wrong. It is a story about migration, about survival, about the audacity to arrive with almost nothing and to build a dynasty so powerful that even the most aggressive immigration enforcement agencies in the United States government have circled them, studied them, and ultimately left them alone. Before we go any further, if you want to understand how real power is built quietly in this country, stay until the end of this video. Subscribe right now, because we are about to go deep into a world that most people never see. Let us start at the beginning, because every empire has a moment of origin, and this one begins not in a Manhattan penthouse or a Houston boardroom, but in the city of Karachi in the year 1962. Karachi in the early 1960s was a city of enormous ambition and enormous chaos. Pakistan was barely 15 years old as a nation. The city was flooded with migrants from the partition, with entrepreneurs trying to build something from nothing in a country that was itself being invented in real time. It was in this environment that a young man named Akbar Hasnan grew up watching his father run a textile trading business. The family was not poor, but they were not wealthy either. They were what you might call the aspirational middle class, the kind of family where everyone works, everyone sacrifices, and everyone has their eye on something bigger than what they currently have. Akbar was brilliant. This is not family mythology. His academic record was documented. He won a scholarship to study civil engineering at the University of Karachi. And then, in 1968, he received something that would change the trajectory of his family forever: a Fulbright scholarship to study at the University of Texas at Austin. He arrived in America with $73 in his pocket, a single suitcase, and an engineering mind that the United States government had literally paid to bring here. He was not a refugee. He was not an illegal immigrant. He was an invited guest of the American academic establishment, and he intended to make the most of it. What Akbar found in Texas was not just an education. He found a landscape. Texas in the late 1960s was exploding. The oil economy was beginning its transformation into a broader industrial and real estate economy. Houston was growing at a pace that made New York look sleepy. Land was cheap. Capital was available. And the city had a hunger for engineers and builders that it could barely satisfy. Akbar graduated in 1970 with a master's degree in civil engineering, and instead of going back to Pakistan, he did something that defined the next 60 years of his family's story. He stayed. He took a job with a mid-sized Houston construction firm. He learned how American contracts worked, how American banks worked, how American zoning and permitting worked. He was not just doing the technical work. He was studying the entire ecosystem of American building and real estate from the inside. He saved every dollar he could. He sent money back to his family in Karachi. He lived simply, in a small apartment in the Montrose neighborhood of Houston, driving a used car, cooking his own food, and after 4 years of working for other people, he made his first move. In 1974, Akbar Hasnan registered a company called AH Construction Services, LLC, in the state of Texas. He had $22,000 in savings, 2 Pakistani colleagues who trusted him enough to invest alongside him, and a contract to build a small commercial strip mall in the suburb of Pasadena, Texas. That strip mall still stands. It has been renovated twice, and it is still owned by the Hasnain family. That is the detail that matters. He never sold it. In a culture that is obsessed with the quick flip, with the exit strategy, with the capital gains, Akbar Hasnain built his empire on one principle that he hammered into his children so relentlessly that it became the family creed. You do not sell what God has given you the wisdom to acquire. You hold it. You pass it down. You let time turn dirt into gold. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, Ujj construction grew steadily. They built commercial properties, warehouses, small office parks, a few residential developments in the suburbs of Houston, nothing glamorous, nothing that would get you in the pages of the Houston Chronicle. But the portfolio was accumulating, quietly, methodically, like water filling a reservoir. By 1983, the family owned over 40 commercial properties in the greater Houston area, all of them under various LLC names, none of them obviously connected to a single owner. This fragmentation was not an accident. Akbar had advice from a very smart accountant in 1976, a man named Robert Willoughby, who would become one of the most important figures in the Hasnain family's financial architecture. Willoughby told him something simple but profound. The wealthiest families in America do not put all their assets under one name. They create a web of entities. Each entity owns a piece of something. The web is connected at the top by a trust or a holding company, but on the surface it looks like dozens of separate businesses. This structure protects you from litigation. It protects you from creditors. And it makes it almost impossible for any government agency to calculate your true net worth. Akbar took that advice and turned it into a religion. By the time his 2 sons, Tariq and Imran Hasnain, arrived in the United States in 1985 and 1987 respectively, the family already had the skeleton of a multi-state real estate empire. Tariq came over on a student visa to study business at Rice University. Imran followed 2 years later to study architecture at the University of Houston. Both young men were brilliant, driven, and had grown up watching their father build something extraordinary. But they had also grown up in a Pakistan that was changing rapidly, and they understood instinctively what their father understood experientially. America was the arena. Pakistan was the heart. But the wealth had to be built here. Tariq graduated in 1989 and immediately went to work for his father full-time. He was the deal-maker, the talker, the relationship builder. He had his father's engineering mind, but his mother's social grace. And he understood that in the American business world, who you know matters as much as what you own. He began cultivating relationships with Houston's political and business establishment, with a patience and a thoroughness that would have impressed the most seasoned lobbyist. He joined civic organizations. He donated to political campaigns on both sides of the aisle. He showed up at charity galas and hospital fundraisers. He became, within 5 years of graduating, a recognizable figure in Houston's power structure. Imran took a different path. He graduated in 1991 and almost immediately launched an architecture and development firm called Crescent Design Partners. On the surface, it was an independent company. In reality, it was the design and development arm of the Hasnan Empire, handling all the architectural work, the permitting, the construction management for every new project the family undertook. By keeping it as a technically separate entity, they created an additional layer of privacy and an additional stream of profit. When Ujj Construction built a building, Crescent Design Partners designed it, managed it, and collected fees for doing so. The money moved efficiently within the family ecosystem while appearing, on paper, to be transactions between independent companies. This is not illegal. This is sophisticated, and it is exactly how every major dynasty in America operates. Through the 1990s, the family made 3 critical moves that transformed them from a significant regional player into something approaching a national force. The first was energy. Houston is the energy capital of the world, and the Hasnan family had been building commercial properties for oil and gas companies since the late 1970s. But in the early 1990s, Tariq recognized a shift. The oil majors were beginning to outsource more and more of their infrastructure needs. They did not want to own the office parks where their engineers worked. They did not want to own the warehouses where their equipment was stored. They wanted to lease. They wanted someone else to hold the deed and collect the rent. Tariq positioned the family as that someone. He secured long-term triple-net leases with several major energy companies, including at least 2 that are in the Fortune 500. The names of those companies have never been publicly linked to the Hasnain family because the leases are held by numbered LLCs. But the income from those leases alone, across a portfolio of 11 properties in the Houston Energy Corridor, is estimated by people close to the family to exceed $40 million per year. $40 million a year in passive income from 11 buildings in one corridor of one city. And that is just one piece of the portfolio. The second move was healthcare. In 1994, Akbar Hasnan, now in his mid-50s and starting to think about legacy, made an observation that would prove to be extraordinarily prescient. He noticed that the suburban sprawl that had been consuming Houston for 2 decades was creating enormous demand for medical services in areas that were medically underserved. The major hospital systems were concentrated downtown and in the wealthy inner suburbs. But the outer suburbs, particularly in communities with large working class and immigrant populations, had almost no access to quality outpatient care. He saw a need. He saw a real estate opportunity. And he saw a way to serve his community while building his wealth. He founded Crescent Health Partners in 1994, a company that built and operated ambulatory surgery centers and outpatient medical office buildings in underserved suburban communities around Houston and eventually across Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma. Within 10 years, Crescent Health Partners had built or acquired 27 medical facilities across 4 states. The company was eventually partially sold to a private equity group in 2007 for a transaction that insiders estimate valued the company at just over $400 million. The Hasnain family retained a minority equity stake in the surviving entity and also retained ownership of the real estate underlying 14 of the 27 facilities. They sold the operations but kept the land. They let someone else manage the hospitals while they collected rent on the ground forever. This is the ground lease strategy applied to healthcare, and it is the same playbook that has made the Goldman family invisible billionaires in Manhattan. The third move was political infrastructure, and this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. By the late 1990s, the Hasnan family had accumulated enough wealth to operate at the highest levels of American political philanthropy. Tariq Hasnan, now the public face of the family's civic engagement, was giving to political campaigns, foundations, and causes in a way that was carefully calibrated to build maximum influence with minimum profile. He never gave the single largest donation to any organization. He gave consistently, across a broad range of institutions, year after year, so that his name appeared on donor lists without ever appearing to dominate them. He funded a chair at Rice University's business school. He donated to the Texas Children's Hospital expansion. He gave to the Harris County Republican Party and the Harris County Democratic Party, simultaneously, a strategy that ensured he had a relationship with whoever won. He also, in the year 2000, made a donation that would prove to be the single most important political investment in the family's history. He gave $100,000 to the foundation of a sitting United States Senator, a man who would go on to serve in 2 presidential administrations. In return, he received nothing explicit. No contract, no favor, no quid pro quo. He received something far more valuable. He received a relationship. And in America, a genuine relationship with someone in that position of power is worth more than any contract you could sign. This is how real influence works. It is not corruption. It is the patient cultivation of trust at the highest levels of power over years and decades until the day comes when you need a phone call made and you know exactly whose number to dial. Now we need to address the elephant in the room, because the title of this video promises you that this family is untouchable, and you need to understand exactly what that means. The Hasnan family has been the subject of at least 3 separate federal investigations since the year 2002, not because they were doing anything illegal. They were investigated because they are a wealthy, prominent Muslim family of Pakistani origin and in the post-September 11th environment. That combination was enough to attract the attention of multiple federal agencies. The first investigation was initiated by the FBI in 2003 as part of the broader post-9/11 sweep of Muslim-owned businesses with significant financial activity. Agents spent 8 months reviewing the family's financial records, interviewing their employees, and examining their charitable donations for any connection to organizations on the Treasury Department's terrorist financing watch list. They found nothing. The investigation was closed without any charges, without any public disclosure, and with an informal apology delivered through the family's legal team. The second investigation was initiated by the IRS in 2009, triggered by the complexity of the family's corporate structure. When you have dozens of interconnected LLCs, trusts, and holding companies, it can look to an untrained eye like tax evasion. The IRS spent 2 years untangling the web. What they found was not evasion. They found a family that had spent 35 years following the advice of top-tier tax attorneys and accountants with extraordinary precision. Every entity was properly structured. Every transfer was documented. Every deduction was defensible. The investigation resulted in a modest adjustment to a 2007 tax filing, a settlement of approximately $200,000, and the quiet closing of a file that had occupied 3 revenue agents for 24 months. The third investigation is the most recent and the most relevant to the current political environment. In 2018, following the expansion of immigration enforcement priorities under the new federal administration, ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency, flagged several of the Hasnan family's companies as potential targets for workforce audits. These are audits that examine whether a company has knowingly employed undocumented workers. The family's construction and property management operations employ a significant number of workers from Central America and South Asia, and ICE believed there might be irregularities in their hiring documentation. The audit began in early 2019. It was conducted by a team of 6 ICE agents working out of the Houston field office. They requested I-9 forms for over 1,200 employees across 9 of the family's companies. They interviewed employees. They cross-referenced Social Security numbers with federal databases. The audit lasted 11 months. What they found was a workforce with meticulous documentation. Because the Hasnan family, advised by their legal team a decade earlier, had implemented an electronic employment eligibility verification system called E-Verify across all of their companies. E-Verify is a voluntary federal program that allows employers to confirm the eligibility of their workers in real time. Most large employers use it. Many small employers do not bother. The Hasnan family had made it mandatory, not because the law required it, but because their lawyers told them it would make them bulletproof. And it did. ICE closed the audit in late 2019 without a single citation. 11 months of federal investigation, 6 agents, 1,200 employees, 0 findings. The ICE story circulated within Houston's business community and within the Pakistani American community across the country. It became a legend, not because the family had done anything illegal and gotten away with it, but because the family had anticipated the threat, prepared for it decades in advance, and rendered themselves immune. That is not luck. That is architecture. That is the kind of strategic thinking that separates a wealthy family from an untouchable dynasty. Let us talk about the next generation, because dynasties live or die by their transitions. Akbar Hasnain passed away in 2011 at the age of 71 in the same Houston house he had lived in since 1979. He did not die in a mansion. He did not die surrounded by visible symbols of wealth. He died in a 4-bedroom house in the River Oaks neighborhood, a house that, according to people who visited it, was comfortable but modest, furnished with the tastes of a man who had grown up in Karachi and never entirely lost his immigrant's instinct for restraint. His funeral was attended by over 1,000 people. The mayor of Houston sent a representative. 3 members of the Texas state legislature attended in person. He left behind a fortune that his family has never publicly disclosed. Estimates from people with knowledge of the portfolio suggest total assets, including real estate, equity holdings, and cash reserves, in the range of $3 to $4 billion. Not all of that is liquid. Most of it is wrapped up in properties and long-term investments. But the income that flows from those assets, the rent, the lease payments, the dividends from equity stakes, is estimated at over $200 million per year, $200 million a year, in income, from assets accumulated over 40 years by a man who arrived in America with $73. After Akbar's death, the family's leadership structure shifted in a way that was itself a masterclass in succession planning. Tariq became the chairman of the family's central holding company, a Delaware-registered entity called Crescent Holdings Trust. Imran became the operational head of the real estate and construction portfolio. And a third figure emerged as the family's newest power player, a woman named Nadia Hasnan, Tariq's daughter and Akbar's granddaughter, who had spent 6 years working for Goldman Sachs in New York before returning to Houston to join the family business. Nadia's arrival fundamentally changed the family's investment strategy. She brought with her a Wall Street fluency that the family had never had before. She understood capital markets, derivatives, rights structures, and institutional investment in a way that allowed the family to do something it had never previously attempted. She helped the family take external capital. For decades, the Hasnan family had operated entirely with its own money. They did not raise funds from outside investors. They did not have limited partners. They did not participate in any investment vehicle that would require them to disclose their financials to outside parties. This was a deliberate choice rooted in Akbar's obsessive commitment to privacy. But Nadia recognized that this approach, while prudent, was also a ceiling. Without outside capital, the family could only grow as fast as its own cash generation allowed. She spent 2 years between 2013 and 2015 traveling between Houston, New York, and London, meeting with sovereign wealth funds, family offices, and institutional investors. She was not pitching her family's wealth. She was pitching her family's track record, their 40-year history of holding assets, their impeccable reputation, and their relationships with the energy, healthcare, and commercial real estate sectors that most institutional investors found difficult to access directly. In 2015, she closed the family's first external investment partnership, a real estate fund called Crescent Opportunity Partners, which raised $450 million from 7 institutional investors, including a Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund and 2 American university endowments. The fund would be used to acquire commercial real estate in Texas, Oklahoma, and Louisiana, with the Hasnan family acting as general partner and contributing 20% of the capital alongside the institutional investors. It was a watershed moment. The family was no longer just a wealthy family with a large portfolio. They were now fund managers with fiduciary responsibilities and institutional counterparties, and a level of legitimacy that put them in a completely different category of player. When your investors include a sovereign wealth fund and university endowments, you are not a local real estate family. You are a global asset manager with a local address. Crescent Opportunity Partners performed remarkably well. Over the fund's 6-year life, it generated an annualized return of approximately 14%, well above the benchmark for private real estate. Several of the original investors rolled their returns directly into a second fund, Crescent Opportunity Partners II, which closed in 2019 with $600 million in commitments. But the real estate portfolio is only one dimension of the Hasnan family's wealth. Because while Tariq was building the real estate and political relationships, and Imran was managing the construction and architectural operations, and Nadia was building the institutional investment business, the family was also quietly building something that most outside observers have entirely missed. They were building a technology and infrastructure business. The origin of this is somewhat unlikely. In 2008, in the depths of the financial crisis, Imran Hasnan was sitting in a meeting with one of the family's construction contractors and heard a complaint that he had heard dozens of times before. The contractor was struggling to manage the documentation and quality control for a large commercial construction project. The paperwork was enormous. The processes for tracking materials, managing subcontractors, and maintaining compliance with building codes were all manual, slow, and prone to error. It was, the contractor said, a nightmare that cost them money on every single job. Imran went home that night and called a software engineer he knew from his days at the University of Houston, a man named Vikram Nair, who had gone on to build and sell 2 small software companies in the previous decade. He told Vikram what he had heard. He asked a simple question. Could you build software that solves this problem? Vikram said yes. Imran gave him the seed funding from the family's discretionary capital. 12 months later, they had a working product. They called the company Construct IQ. Construct IQ started as a construction management software platform, essentially a digital system for managing the documentation, compliance, and quality control processes for large commercial construction projects. The Hasnan family tested it on their own projects first. The efficiency gains were significant. They then offered it to the contractors who worked with them. The contractors loved it. Word spread. By 2012, Construct IQ had 200 paying clients and annual revenue of approximately $8 million. By 2015, it had grown to 1,200 clients in 28 states and revenue of $42 million. By 2018, the company had a staff of 300 people, offices in Houston, Chicago, and Atlanta, and revenue approaching $90 million annually. In 2020, at the height of the COVID pandemic, when construction technology was suddenly one of the hottest sectors in venture capital, the Hasnan family received an unsolicited offer to acquire Construct IQ from a major enterprise software company. The offer was not disclosed publicly. People close to the transaction estimate it was in the range of $400 to $600 million. The family declined. They did not sell, because that is not what the Hasnan family does. Instead, they took a minority outside investment from a private equity firm that valued the company at approximately $500 million, used the cash injection to accelerate international expansion into Canada, the United Kingdom, and Australia, and retained majority control. As of today, Construct IQ is operating in 7 countries, employs over 600 people, and is generating revenue estimated at over $150 million annually. Its value has likely grown significantly since the 2020 transaction. The Hasnan family owns the majority of a $500 million technology company, in addition to $3 to $4 billion in real estate, in addition to a $200 million a year passive income stream, in addition to institutional investment partnerships with sovereign wealth funds. You have never heard their name, and that is exactly how they want it. Let us talk about the Pakistani American community, because the Hasnan family's relationship with that community is one of the most important and least understood dimensions of their power. The Pakistani American community in the United States is approximately 500,000 people, strong and growing. It is one of the most educated and highest-earning immigrant communities in the country. Pakistani Americans are disproportionately represented in medicine, engineering, finance, and technology. They are concentrated in major metropolitan areas, particularly in New York, Chicago, Houston, Dallas, and Northern California. But despite this economic and professional success, Pakistani Americans have historically had almost no political representation and very limited collective civic infrastructure. There was no IPAC for Pakistani Americans. There was no equivalent of the Irish political action committees that shaped American politics for a century. There were community mosques and cultural organizations, but no unified voice, no coordinated political power. The Hasnain family recognized this as both a vulnerability and an opportunity. A vulnerability because it meant that Pakistani Americans were easy targets in moments of political hostility, like the post-9/11 period, when the community had no organized defense infrastructure. And an opportunity because the first family to build that infrastructure would have an extraordinary amount of influence within the community and, by extension, over the political figures who sought the community's support. Starting in 2005, the Hasnan family began funding a series of organizations designed to build this infrastructure. The most significant is an organization called the American Pakistani Civic Association, a nonprofit based in Houston with chapters in 12 cities across the United States. The APCA provides civic education, voter registration assistance, legal referral services for community members facing immigration issues, and a networking infrastructure that connects Pakistani American professionals and business owners across the country. The Hasnan family is the primary funder of the APCA, contributing an estimated $2 to $3 million annually. The APCA has registered over 40,000 Pakistani American voters since 2008. In close elections in states like Texas and Michigan and Georgia, a block of 40,000 motivated voters, concentrated in specific communities, can be determinative. Political candidates know this, and political candidates know who controls that block. This is the Hasnan family's most sophisticated power move. They do not write checks to politicians for personal gain. They build civic institutions that create genuine political power for their community, and in doing so, they create a situation where politicians come to them, where senators and congresspeople and governors seek the family's endorsement, because that endorsement comes with organizational infrastructure, not just a donation. The family does not need to call the senator. The senator calls them. This dynamic was on full display in 2019 when the ICE workforce audit was underway. Several members of Congress from Texas, on both sides of the aisle, made quiet inquiries to the ICE field office about the nature and status of the audit, not demanding that it be stopped, simply inquiring, making it known that the target of the audit was a respected member of the business community, with relationships throughout the Texas political establishment. Those inquiries did not derail the audit, but they ensured that the audit was conducted by the book, without any prosecutorial overreach, without any public leaks designed to damage the family's reputation while the investigation was ongoing. That is political protection, not corruption. Protection. The the kind that comes from decades of civic investment and genuine relationship building. Now let us talk about the properties themselves, because this is ultimately a story about real estate and about the specific assets that form the foundation of the Hasnain family's wealth. The anchor of the portfolio remains the Houston Energy Corridor properties, the 11 commercial buildings under long-term triple-net leases to energy companies. These buildings total approximately 2.4 million square feet of office and warehouse space. At current market rates for the Houston Energy Corridor, the combined value of these properties is estimated at approximately $800 million to $1 billion. The annual net operating income from these properties, after expenses and before debt service, is approximately $70 million. But the energy corridor is not where the growth is. The growth is in two places. The first is industrial real estate in the Texas Triangle, the metropolitan corridor connecting Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio. The explosion of e-commerce and logistics has created enormous demand for large distribution centers and last-mile delivery facilities throughout this corridor. The Hasnan family, through Crescent Holdings Trust and its affiliated LLCs, has been acquiring industrial land in suburban locations throughout this corridor since 2012. They currently own approximately 400 acres of industrial land and 14 operational distribution and logistics facilities. The combined value of these assets is estimated at approximately $600 million and growing rapidly as e-commerce continues to reshape the logistics landscape. The second area of growth is mixed-use development in Houston's emerging neighborhoods. Houston, unlike New York or Chicago, has no